Good evening, Oxnard. We're going to give a moment for attendees to get connected to the Zoom. Welcome to the League of Women Voters presentation of the Measure C in Oxnard. We are co-sponsoring this tonight with the Citizens for a Better Oxnard, which is a Facebook group. And I'm David Marin, a member of the League of Women Voters and your moderator for tonight. We have the proponent and author of Measure C, Erin Starr, with us, and the Oxnard City Manager, Alex Nguyen, who is opposed. Before we get to the actual format, we're going to start with a welcome from our League President, Kathy Morgan.
Thank you, David. Good evening, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. The League of Women Voters is pleased to partner with Citizens for a Better Oxnard in presenting this informational discussion on Oxnard Ballot Measure C. The League of Women Voters was formed in 1920 after the passage of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, with the mission of educating a whole new group of voters, women. Today, we continue with the mission of empowering voters and defending democracy by registering voters, getting out the vote, and supporting fair and transparent elections. We are a nonpartisan organization committed to providing voters with unbiased, factual information on which to base their decisions when voting. This presentation is an example of that. We are fortunate tonight to be able to hear from representatives from both sides of Measure C. Thank you to Mr. Starr and Mr. Nguyen for being here this evening to help voters get the information they need to make their decision on this measure. At this time, I would like to turn it back to our moderator, David Marin. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Kathy. So a little bit about why we're here tonight. It's November 3rd. The election is next Tuesday. It is late, but there is an interest within Oxnard about this Measure C. It has to do with term limits. And the actual information that you will be seeing on your screen, I'm going to share with you. This is what your ballot would look like. It's going to have a message about, shall this ordinance be adopted? And I'll let you look at that. It's in Spanish and in English on your ballot. Measure C came around because Mr. Starr and his group wrote this back in 2020 to put on the ballot in Oxnard when no term limits existed. However, the city went ahead during this process and began its own looking into putting on measure or term limits on the ballot, and they went ahead and brought their measure forward as well. They adopted Mr. Starr's at one point, so that did not show on the ballot. Mr. Starr felt that wasn't fair and went to the courts where he prevailed, and the courts ordered that this Measure C should be on the ballot. So as an Oxnard resident, you have two things. Measure B, as in Bravo, is already has been enacted by the voters, and this will replace Measure B with Mr. Starr's Measure C. Both gentlemen will give you much more erudite answers and explanations about everything, I'm sure, but that's a little bit. The Citizens for a Better Oxnard group approached both gentlemen about having a forum. At that point, the two sides needed to agree on a moderator and a host, and that was when they both decided that it should be the League of Women Voters, and that's why the League is involved. So we're grateful to Citizens for a Better Oxnard for putting this together, but from that point, the League has been responsible for developing all of the format and the questions. We are going to give each candidate or each speaker tonight, we've given them the questions in advance so that we can get right into the details. And that's enough from me. Let's go ahead and get started and hear from the two panelists. We're going to begin with Mr. Erin Starr. And for both of you, but we'll begin with Erin, you have 90 seconds. Please explain how Measure C is different from the existing term limits under Measure B. And are these differences better or worse?
Thank you. The city manager's Measure B limits council members and the mayor to 3 consecutive 4-year terms, but treats the council and the mayor as if they are 2 separate offices. If someone serves as a council member for 12 years, that person could then immediately serve as mayor for 12 years and then go back to being a council member for 12 years and so on. In other words, by design, the city manager's Measure B has a loophole that allows a council member and a mayor to forever evade those term limits. Measure C allows for 2 consecutive 4-year terms, whether as a council member, the mayor, or a combination of the two. This closes the loophole the city manager and city council created with Measure B to evade term limits. Neither measure is a lifetime ban. Both require at least a 2-year break after being termed out before being able to serve again. 8 years is plenty of time to make an impact. The governor and other statewide offices are limited to 2 terms. Even the president of the United States is limited to 2 terms. One particularly important reason that we need shorter term limits is because Oxnard voters now elect council members by district instead of at large. You only get to vote for mayor and 1 of the 6 council seats. Even though all 7 get to vote on matters that affect you, without term limits, that's not a good situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex, same question to you. How is Measure C different from B, and are these differences better or worse?
Thank you. So I'll start where Mr. Starr left off with regard to his term limits somehow promising to fix districts or change districting. It doesn't. So having term limits is irrelevant to whether we have people voting for district council members or not. This measure, Measure C, is actually worse. The current measure that we have, the term limits we have, are sensible and reasonable. What Mr. Starr fails to point out is, unlike his analogy to president or governor, it doesn't limit senators from running for governor as soon as they're done with their Senate term, or for governors to run for president. That's the key. Term limits should limit you to the number of terms for one office, not for any office in a jurisdiction. And this timeout here is also a hoax because it actually discriminates against people coming out of districts 3, 4, and 6, which includes the Colonia and South Oxnard. They're going to have to sit out for 4 years. But the bottom line is what this creates is a revolving door at city council where you have rookies all the time. And the worst thing is you can have an absolute rookie or a green person step in and become mayor who has no experience leading the city. They're different offices. They're not the same office. Thank you.
Thank you. And just raise your hand or motion to me if you wish to rebut. We'll move on to the next question then. Alex, we'll start with you. So in my research, I've found that there's various trade-offs with term limits. So on one hand, term limits can promote fresh ideas. New people come in more frequently. But on the other hand, term limits can lead to less experience and less institutional knowledge, which I think you were alluding to previously. Give us a little bit more about your view of the trade-offs.
So you're correct about the trade-offs, and that's why I argue that the existing term limits strike a fair balance between having experience and having fresh ideas. 3 terms is the perfect amount of time for that. And the other thing that's important to note is term limits themselves don't guarantee someone gets to serve 3 full terms. They still have to stand for election at each term. The voters still get to decide. That's the other problem with Mr. Starr's measure, which is it restricts the voters from choosing to retain someone that they want to retain for a 3rd term, or to promote someone to mayor who's proven themselves on the city council. And this idea that incumbency guarantees you re-election is really, it's been demonstrated at the highest level, the highest office in the land with presidents. And we can go all the way back to, I think, 1829. John Quincy Adams didn't win re-election. And in more recent memory, we've got Ford, Carter, Bush, and the most recent president. So incumbency doesn't guarantee that you get your terms because voters have proven that they will throw someone out that they don't like. Thank you.
Aaron, same question to you as far as the trade-offs, the comparison about promoting fresh ideas with a more frequent turnover, but losing institutional knowledge.
Does anyone actually believe that in a city of 200,000 people, only 7 are special enough to serve on the city council? We have a council manager form of government. The role of the council is to enact legislative policy. The role of the city manager is to run the organization to make the day-to-day administrative decisions. We need new people elected frequently to the council to inject fresh ideas and bring about robust debate. Diversity in thought will lead to better policy-making decisions. What we have today on the council is a lot of groupthink. There's little genuine debate. 94% of the council's votes are unanimous. And it is rare for our council to do anything other than approve the city staff's recommendations. We might as well have only one council member. When it comes to the city council, life experience is much more valuable than government experience. With a council manager form of government, the experience and institutional knowledge resides with the city manager and the people he hires. In other words, we should elect life experience, but then hire any required institutional knowledge in our professional staff. The city argues that the only way to gain experience and knowledge about city governance is to serve on the council. This is not rocket science. Members of the public learn by reading staff reports, watching staff presentations, and watching council meetings, just like council members do. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alex,
Yes.
you will have a 30-second rebuttal.
Well, that's spoken like someone who doesn't understand how local government works, clearly. The biggest problem with this is having this revolving door. Not only do you have lack of experience, the point he's making about staff running the show is that what this does is it makes the city manager the most powerful person at City Hall. And as your city manager, I'm going to tell all of you, that's a terrible idea. It is a terrible idea.
Thank you. Would you like to rebut it, Aaron?
Sure.
30 seconds.
Yeah, you know, the city argues that our measure would prevent voters from retaining an effective council member for 3 full terms in office. The measure they wrote does the exact same thing, just at a different point in time. You know, members of the public have so much institutional knowledge that candidly council members wish they'd stop bringing up these subjects. I'm thinking of people like Doug Perello and Larry Stein, Ray Blattell. These guys get through the details and they present them. So there's a lot of capable people out there.
Thank you. Aaron, we'll start with you on the next question. I want to go into a different aspect of what a council member does. Beyond just the city, they serve on regional collaborations, regional boards, such as SCAG, VCTC. In your mind, does Measure C help Oxnard residents when it comes to our council members serving on these other boards because there's more turnover or fresher ideas, or does it hurt the city? And tell us why.
I'm first of all skeptical that all these boards really accomplish a lot other than paying council members an extra stipend to attend these meetings. I think the same principles should apply to regional entities as to the city council. We need turnover and new ideas there as well. I don't see why any person who's new couldn't just call up another person in another agency and have a conversation. This is not rocket science. Thank you.
Alex, your point of view about regional collaboration and boards?
Yeah, it's not rocket science. It is, though, an art form of governance. Again, this just shows Mr. Starr's ignorance about how things actually work versus how he thinks they should work. So there are at least 15 or 16 regional boards and commissions in the county. Some of them are very, very important, such as the Airport Commission, our Visitors Bureau, the Regional Defense Partnership for the Navy base, Animal Regulation Commission, the Water Commission. There's just so many that are important. The Transportation Commission, and all these organizations together collectively make long-term plans for the county, and we need to be there and be able to have not only institutional knowledge, but to be able to work and collaborate together so that we have mutual benefits across the county. So for us to be the largest city in this county and to constantly send new people there defeats that entire purpose. I understand Mr. Starr would prefer no government agencies, but these organizations, while they move slowly, they are extremely important for our collective future.
Care to rebut?
Nope.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. I just want to make an announcement to the viewers, though. The League of Women Voters Zoom system does provide Spanish language translation. If you have the latest version of the Zoom application, 5.0 or higher, you should be able to go to the closed caption option and select Spanish translation and read the translation. It won't be perfect, but it'll help. Aaron, I'm interested to learn more about your thought process on this. I mean, Measure C is obviously very important to you, so important that you fought for and won a legal opinion requiring that the city put it on the ballot. It certainly would have been easier to just accept Measure B as having gotten most of what you wanted, although not everything. Share with us your reasons for going ahead and pushing to have Measure C on the ballot.
Well, it wasn't like the city council was exactly negotiating with us. Of course, it's easier to just walk away when the government violates your rights, but that just encourages further transgressions. The government hopes you won't fight back, but apathy toward government abuse is a sure path to losing our rights and freedoms. When government violates the law, it needs to feel consequences. The city did not put Measure C on the ballot in 2020 because the city manager and the city council did not want the voters to make an informed choice between two options. It's vital that we defend ourselves from bullying behavior by the government. Not fighting back would have allowed democracy to be bulldozed by bureaucracy. The court ruling was pretty scathing. What the council did was shameful, and the court agreed with us. Remember that the council voted to adopt our measure in January 2020. When doing so would effectively kill it. And now the same council members have signed ballot arguments against the same measure they previously adopted. It was all a game to them to retain power and thwart voters. Over 12,000 people in our city signed the petitions to get a two-term limit measure on the ballot. We owed it to them and democracy itself to fight for their right to vote on their measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex, to those points, certainly when Measure C was first proposed, the city could have just put its version, Measure B and Measure C on the ballots and just leave it up to the voters to decide. But that's not the course the city chose, as Aaron just explained. So can you explain to us why the city went that path and didn't just let both ballot measures be on the ballot for the voters?
Sure. Well, for starters, Mr. Starr's lawyer asked us to adopt the measure. We have that, right? So we did. And then he complains bitterly because we put on what we consider a much better measure on, and the public approved it, I believe, by 84%. And to hear Mr. Starr, discuss the principles of local democracy is a little precious here, because if you think of all the things he's done to erode local democracy and participation, remember his various other measures, right? He's suing us in federal court on the campaign finance reform part of our Measure B, because he doesn't want any limitations on financial contributions so that he can keep pumping money in from elsewhere to try to influence City Hall, because he can't win election in City Hall. And he's suing the California Attorney General over a state law that would require him and everyone else to actually pay signature gatherers a decent wage rather than poverty wages to collect signatures, because he can't actually get real volunteers to collect signatures. So when you add all these things up, democracy is not something Aaron Starr cares about. Neither are the people of Oxnard. So when you look at these measures, I highly encourage everyone to read the fine print. Thank you.
And I will point out that inside the voter information guide, you have the complete ballot measure, the impartial analysis from the city. In that voter information guide, you also have the ballot arguments from both sides and their rebuttals. So that's excellent opportunity for you to learn more about these by reading that. Alex, I'm going to start with you on this next question. So I want to get back into the weeds a little bit. So one of the clear differences between Measure B and Measure C is this handling of council members who wish to run for mayor. So under Measure B, a council member could serve 3 terms, then run immediately for mayor if the seat was up for election, and possibly serve another 3 terms without taking any break. Quite a difference under Measure C. There, if a council member was finishing the 2 terms, they would have to take a break. But even more importantly, under Measure C, if a council member had only served 1 term, and then ran for a mayor and won, they would only serve one term as well. And I'm going to give both of you a chance to answer this, but correct me if I made any mistakes in that, but share with us what you think are the benefits and disadvantages of these two things. I mean, it's quite a stark difference. In one hand, somebody could serve almost 24 years. On the other, they would have to take a break.
So I think the existing term limits that we have now is what is sensible, right? And is a fair balance in the trade-offs, David, that you mentioned earlier. This for Mr. Starr to call this a loophole is just ridiculous. Come on. Like the example I gave, people who serve as senators can serve their Senate terms and then run for governor. They don't have to take a break, right? Because they've gained the experience to be able to step up to that higher office. Just like governors can run their terms and then choose to run for president. There's no break required. So why should there be a break required when you gain your experience as a council member and then you want to step up to the higher office to lead the entire city as mayor? It makes no sense. And then with Mr. Starr's measure, like I said before, it also discriminates against half of our districts because they would actually need to wait 4 years, not 2. And that includes the Colonia in South Oxnard. They're never going to have an experienced mayor. That's just the way it would work. So it's again, it's rather misleading to say that the president and the governor only have 2 terms, right? They're not forced to time out when they have office beforehand. That's just disingenuous. Thank you.
And Aaron, same question to you. Talk to us about the benefits and disadvantages as far as how this whole thing works between council members moving on to mayor or having the amount of terms that they serve.
Well, previously, you really well described what we call the loophole in the existing term limits. I disagree with the city's premise that it is vital that current council members be elected as mayor, or that one must have significant experience as a council member in order to serve as mayor. For the most part, the mayor's additional duties are ceremonial in nature. There are plenty of capable people in Oxnard that know how to preside over meetings. Think about those who run meetings at work or who have taken on leadership roles at civic organizations, PTAs, and various other service clubs. In most California cities, the mayor position rotates among members of the council. In those cities, a person serving their first term on the council will often serve one of those years as mayor. What this demonstrates is that there are no special qualifications for mayors compared to the other council members. But for those who do believe that council experience is important, council terms are staggered. So even under Measure C, you're going to have at least 3 members of the council with 2 to 6 years of accumulated experience who are eligible to run for mayor. And because Measure C is not a lifetime ban, a former mayor or council member could also run for mayor. In fact, our current mayor was not on the city council when he ran in 2020, and Measure C, of course, allows for that too.
Thank you. I will move on to the next question. Aaron, you'll be
David,
first.
can I have a quick rebuttal?
Would you like to rebut? Certainly.
Yeah, very quickly. Clearly, Mr. Starr has no idea how hard the mayor works. So it isn't just a ceremonial office, right? He's leading and he's representing the entire population here, and he cares about this community deeply. You have no idea how hard he works. So please don't be dismissive of the office of the mayor. That just shows your utter disrespect for this institution and this community. Thank you.
Aaron?
Yeah, what this demonstrates is elitism. The city manager is convinced that only a special class of people are even eligible and competent to serve as mayor, or even on the council for that matter. So I think that we have a democracy in this state where anybody over the age of 18 who's a registered voter can run for these offices, and that's the way it should be. Ordinary people stepping up to make a sacrifice for the public good.
Thank you. As part of my research, we learned that, looked at other cities in Ventura County that have term limits, and just 2, for example, Camarillo and Thousand Oaks, they both have 3 terms for council members. But I want to point out to the audience, Those two cities do not have an elected mayor, so they are a little different. Aaron, I'll start with you. How do you compare the Measure C with 2 terms in Oxnard versus how some of these other cities have adopted 3 terms?
Well, whether a city has a separately elected mayor or one that rotates among the council is not a factor in determining how many consecutive terms a city should allow. The more important distinction is that Cambria and Thousand Oaks do not have Oxnard's history of taxpayer and voter abuse. In addition to what the council did to prevent you from voting on Measure C, last year, we won a lawsuit requiring City Hall to stop overcharging residents for water and wastewater and solid waste services and to return $36.5 million it was illegally skimming from its utility funds. We also won a lawsuit several weeks ago, requiring a City Hall to restore money it was unlawfully spending from the landscape maintenance districts. Sadly, this type of abuse becomes more rampant the larger a city grows. And the larger the population, the more powerful incumbency becomes, and the more important it becomes that the term limits be shorter. It's hard to argue that incumbents have been reelected because the city had been well managed under their leadership. Incumbents were reelected even when we had outrageously bad audit results, with a mind-boggling 111 audit findings showing an utter failure of financial controls. In fact, the last time an incumbent lost a race for re-election in Oxnard was in 2010 in the aftermath of a scandal.
Thank you. Alex, same question to you as far as the 3 terms that are offered in Cambria and Thousand Oaks.
Well, I think clearly it fits them and it works well for them. But I want to get back to this amusing point that Mr. Starr made about the mayor and elitism. Clearly, you don't know John Zaragoza at all. You could not find a mayor in this country that is the furthest thing from part of the elite as our mayor. So again, your ideology does not fit this community. And voters decide, right? What you're doing here with your measure is to curb the options for the voters. So you're using the voters to pass your various ballot initiatives, but you actually don't want to, you actually probably don't trust them, or you actually don't like genuine representative government. And as far as lawsuits, yes, you've won a few and you've also lost a few. So if we want, we can go over a report card on that. But that's how we settle our disputes in this country, is through the legal system. There's nothing wrong with that. Thank you.
Rebuttal?
You know, it's really amusing. The city manager at one point was telling the press that he was opposed to term limits. He thought they were a bad idea. And yet it was only after we put forward our measure that he felt he had to put something in its place in order to protect his city council that he wants to keep. So, you know, we're just putting democracy into action. We're giving people the right to vote when they should have had that in the first place.
Rebuttal, Alex?
As I argue, they're actually taking away people's choices here. That's the irony of all this. Because it's decided at in each election cycle.
Thank you. Alex, we'll start with you on this next one. I'd like to just get a little bit better feeling for how term limits affect other things, such as elections. So in your opinion, Alex, do term limits make it easier for challengers to win elections in any year? Or does it make it that they can only win in the 1 year when someone is termed out? Or does it perhaps make it allow that, since no one is challenging them, candidates just glide through their first couple of terms until they're out? Nobody wants to take them on. So how do you think it affects elections and the ability of people to run versus if there's no term limits at all?
So I don't think it's quite that mechanical at the local level. So specifically, if you look right now, all of our incumbents, even under our current term limits system, all of our incumbents are challenged in this cycle. So that argues against the idea that if you are incumbent, no one will take you on. But I really think it really doesn't affect it the same way because our council members are here and our constituents are here directly every day. It's not like the Congress or the state legislature where you have to deal with Congress or a legislature in terms of what work you're doing, what work you're not doing with regard to a potential reelection, right? So here you're dealing with your constituents on a daily basis. So I think that it doesn't impede how sure it is as an incumbent, because people can be upset with you any given day of the week. So I don't think it helps the way it does at the state or the federal level. Thanks.
Aaron, same question to you. Do you think it makes it easier to become elected if there are term limits in place? Or do you think it makes it more likely that the incumbents just stay in place until their terms are over?
I don't think it's either. I mean, the advantages of incumbency are quite significant, but I don't think term limits change the calculus for when challengers run against incumbents. I do believe that term limits increase the likelihood that more candidates will run. Even when the incumbent is on the ballot, challengers will run to build their name recognition for the next cycle when there will be an open seat. When an open seat occurs, it will likely bring out more candidates who wouldn't have tried to run against an incumbent. I do think that district-based elections, though, have reduced competition. We have one race this year with only 2 candidates, but before districted elections, we never saw that little competition. One of the things which makes it so hard to beat an incumbent is that we use plurality voting with multiple candidates vying for a single seat. And whoever gets the most votes is elected, even if they didn't have a majority. The more candidates there are, the more it divides up the anti-incumbent vote, which usually guarantees the incumbent will win, even though a majority of the voters would prefer someone other than the incumbent. That's suboptimal. Outcome is less likely in jurisdictions that use ranked choice voting, such as was being considered in Ojai right now, and is used in many other places.
And I will point out, since the league does forums around the county, that there are several cities where there was no one who challenged in a particular district. So in some places, because of districts, you just don't have the interest to run. Oxnard being the largest city in the county, usually each district represents more people and there's more eagerness to run. Aaron, I think, let's see, Alex, we're set. So then I think this next question, I start with you, Aaron. If Measure C passes, this is a technical question regarding council members Madrigal and McDonald. They were reelected in 2020. Would they be able to run for 2 more terms or only 1 term?
Yes, 2 more terms. I mean, Measure C is prospective in its application, so the 2-term clock starts in 2022, assuming Measure C is adopted. Had this measure gone on to the ballot in November 2020, when it should have, the clock would have started then rather than 2 years later. The city council's underhanded behavior has served to extend the permitted time in office for those who were reelected in 2020. In the existing term limits created by the council's Measure B, for purposes of calculating term limits, it treats council seats and the mayor's seat as wholly different offices, so that moving from one seat to the other resets the counter. Measure C combines the offices for purposes of calculating the limits, such that you are limited to 8 years, consecutive years, regardless of how much of that time is in which seat on the council.
I do want to clarify my question, though, for you, Aaron. Council members Madrigal and McDonald were elected in 2020. So if Measure C passes, when the clock start then, and then they would have 2 years before they ever run for election in 2024?
So what will happen is that the next time they run will be when the clock starts for them.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification.
So next election for them.
Okay, I think that helps the voters. Alex, separately for you, do existing term limit regulations under Measure B allow a termed out candidate to just move to a different district? Suppose they're renting, they decide to rent in a different district. Could they just shift over and run again in a different district and start the clock all over again without a break?
You mean like Dr. Oz?
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't going there.
Yeah, I think, I mean, hypothetically, yeah, but I'm not, I don't know anyone who actually would do that, like pick up your home and move. I mean, unless you're like really, power hungry and really are desperate to be in office. I mean, it takes a lot to pick up your home and move, although I'm told that Mrs. Starr made that statement a while ago that he would move into another district to run. So I don't know. Maybe he might do it, but
No, Alex, maybe it might help you to, a part of
I
this
think
was
it's
triggered-
unlikely.
In Ojai, there is a council member who is no longer able to rent where she lives
Mhm.
and was sort of limited to only her district, but if she had moved to a different district. So
Right.
that's what precipitated this question.
Yeah.
Nothing.
So
from
it's possible, but it's very unlikely though.
So technically it would be permitted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just like Dr. Oz.
Okay. Well, we'll leave the national out of this for tonight. So I think, Aaron, yes, rebuttal.
Yeah. Well, in thinking about that, you gotta think about also that eventually the lines will be redrawn again for districts. So you could have a situation where a person is in office and then they redraw the line so they're in a different district. So at that point, yeah, they could run again. It's, without having the term limit. So I don't know, I think it was well orchestrated by the city manager to give the council this much flexibility so they could continue to serve longer than voters would really want them to.
Alex?
Quick rebuttal, voters get to decide at every election. You seem to not want to trust the voters. And this getting into this, creating a perfect mousetrap for human behavior is nonsensical. We're not going to create a system where everything is predictable or impossible or possible. This just doesn't make any sense. But I go back to trust the voters at each election, right? Trust the voters at each election. What Mrs. Starr is demonstrating is that actually he doesn't trust the voters.
Going to have to cut you off there, Alex. Sorry.
Yeah.
Time's
So
up.
why did you put Measure B on the ballot? You don't trust the voters then either, I guess.
Okay, Aaron,
And
if you ask
trust
a
your
question, I gotta
small
let
print.
Alex answer.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Alex.
I just couldn't trust Mr. Starr's fine print.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, I think we'll move on to a question more philosophical in a way. Alex, I'll start with you as a city manager. In a way, you've talked about this a bit, but what is the optimal amount of time for a council member? And I'd like you to answer this thinking about the amount of time it takes to get up to speed. But we've seen around the state that there are council members who have served for many, many years who start to lose interest or lose effectiveness as well. So to that point, what is about the optimal amount of time to serve in your opinion?
Okay. So I've worked in city halls for almost a quarter century now. So I can tell you that I actually do believe 3 terms is sensible. I think if you have a council member who's losing interest, then his or her voters need to be attentive and elect a new or a better candidate. But you have to put in time to learn how government works. I know Mr. Starr says it's not rocket science, and that's correct. We're not launching rockets out into outer space here, but it's extremely complex, right? These are institutions that have been around for almost as long as this country has been around. So it is complex, right? There's a lot to learn, and there's balancing a lot of overlapping and often conflicting interests within your district as well as across the city. And people don't figure that out overnight. Also, each individual elected official also needs time to figure out the policy direction, the public policy that they would like to push, and to work with their colleagues. Right, Mr. Starr and his folks seem to not like the fact that our city council has agreement a lot of time. I mean, what would you prefer? That all they do is argue, right? They do have debate. They do vote differently occasionally. So this idea that they have to argue all the time is ridiculous.
Aaron, same question to you about optimal, and maybe as part of your answer, city council members, of course, are not a full-time position. I mean, so perhaps unlike some other statewide offices that are full-time and maybe get up to speed faster, what do you think is sort of the optimal amount of time, and what is the danger of somebody staying too long?
Well, based on input from the community, we decided that 2 terms or 8 years is about the right number. Now remember, because council terms are staggered, you'll always have at least 3 current members of the council with 2 to 6 years of accumulated experience. So there's plenty of experience there. In the course of a year, all the repeating subjects come before the council at least once. If it takes a new council member more than 1 year to learn the ropes, they're probably not a good fit for the job. But thanks to Measure M, that new council member can even watch the staff presentations in advance to have more time to formulate questions before the meeting. Of course, if our council members are going to vote unanimously 94% of the time, like our current council, what's to get up to speed on? It's easy to just vote yes, like everyone else. I suppose one danger of staying too long is becoming ineffective and lazy, and to the extent that that's an issue, more frequent turnover brings new blood and new energy. But I'm more concerned that it just doesn't take long for a person to start enjoying the power and the status of the council, and they soon feel special and entitled enough to violate the very laws put in place for others, like accepting gifts from entities doing business with the city after having voted to ban those gifts.
Thank you. Rebuttal, Alex? You're muted, Alex.
Thank you. I think this just, again, demonstrates Mr. Starr has no understanding of how local government works. If a council member votes yes, it doesn't mean they're lazy. Or it means they've considered it and they agree with it. And then Mr. Starr's point about they're feeling like they're in power and stuff, that's ridiculous here. We don't have that kind. This is not Los Angeles. This is still Oxnard. That stuff is not happening here. Thank you.
And any rebuttal, Aaron?
Yeah, it's Los Angeles, maybe on a smaller scale, but you bet it is. I mean, the city manager just demonstrates his fealty to his existing bosses. And I guess I should admire him for wanting to stick up for his bosses. But I mean, the reality is that, this council hid, for example, the landscape maintenance district audit because they wanted to, protect the city at the expense of the people that actually paid money into those funds. So I'm just not convinced that.
I have to stop you there. Gentlemen, thank you both. We've reached the point where we're going to switch over and do our closing statements. Alex, you'll go first on the closing statement. You'll have 90 seconds. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you, and thanks again for holding this session. As I said at the opening, we already have sensible term limits. I think Mr. Starr just doesn't like the way Oxnard voters have been voting, especially since they didn't vote for him after 5 elections. I think, his efforts to try to manipulate the outcomes here are becoming more and more evident to people. I think that if you look at this measure in context of the other measures, his Measure M, his Measure N, where we can't even make a presentation at a council meeting so that anyone who's viewing the council has no understanding of what the council is voting on because we're not making a live presentation. That hurts public participation and democracy. He's suing us in federal court to kill our campaign finance reform because he doesn't want any limitations on how much fundraising he can do in order to pay signature gatherers. But even there, he's suing the California Attorney General because he doesn't want to pay them a decent wage. He wants to pay them poverty wages. So put all these things together, and what you get is a series of ballot measures and initiatives that actually erode local democracy. Mr. Starr doesn't care about the people of Oxnard. Let me be clear about that. And last thing, read the fine print every time.
Thank you, Alex. Aaron, when you're ready, 90 seconds.
Yeah, if the city manager cared about what voters thought, they would have put this measure on the ballot in the first place without a court having to order them to do it. In 2020, voters approved the concept of term limits, but were only given one option. The loophole in term limits the council wrote for itself allows 2 council members to swap seats every 12 years, evading the entire purpose of term limits and to stay on for decades without a break. The reason why voters were given only one option 2 years ago is because the city council illegally voted to keep Measure C off the ballot. That decision, the court said, quote, served to deny voters their rights, depriving the voters of the opportunity to decide the issue of term limits, end quote. Frankly, the council's behavior here proves our point that elected officials will tend to abuse their power to serve themselves and thwart the voters. With our successful court battle, voters now have the opportunity to cast an informed vote about whether they prefer 3 term limits with a loophole or 2 term limits with no loophole. Let's close the loophole and set reasonable 2-term term limits for the city council. Vote yes on Measure C. Please visit us at yesonoxnardmeasurec.com for more information. And remember this, politicians are like diapers. They should be changed often and for the same reason. Thank you, David, and the League of Women Voters for putting this on. You did an excellent job.
Thank you. And before we go, a couple of announcements. So this is the voter information guide. If you have this at home, you can look up all of the information around Measure C. I want to take a moment to thank all of the League volunteers. And first, I want to thank Manuel Herrera from Citizens for a Better Oxnard for helping to get this put on tonight. From the League, I'd like to thank Kathy Morgan, our president you met earlier. Others behind the scenes are Pat Essick, Cheryl Collard, Wayne Morgan, and Maddie Park. Also want to take a moment to just make an observation that throughout our country, we have very polarized groups of people. And tonight we brought together 2 gentlemen. There were some sharp angles and words, but we were able to host a civil discourse on Measure C and have an expression of ideas from both, obviously different opinions, but I think that's good for our local democracy that we can have these 2 representatives present their case. With that, I want to also point out that this has been recorded and you can visit the League's website probably about tomorrow afternoon and you can view the full recording. Just go to candidate forums. The League's website is lwvventuracounty.org. Thank you to our panelists, Aaron Starr and Alex Nguyen. I'm David Marin with the League of Women Voters, reminding you, don't forget to vote November 8th. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks so
David.
much.
Thank you.